G'day reefers, I'm Cam the Fish Guy. Welcome to Gallery Aquatica TV. Today we're going to be showing you exactly how we aquascape a 14-foot long tank using live rock. This massive tank has been running for around about 6 months, and in that 6 months we've added 12 boxes of live rock. Now that's over 200 kilos of live rock to establish the ecosystem in this tank. Now we've added the boxes of rock slowly so that we don't have imbalances which cause problems with algae or fish disease or the like. Now we've also started adding fish to the system. This system has got its own quarantine tank built into the filtration, and we'll show you this as well as other aspects of the tank in future episodes. But today we're going to focus on the aquascape. Now we've already spent 3 visits on the aquascape, arranging the rocks and using epoxy to secure them to create a beautiful structure onto which we're going to grow our corals. Now today we're going to be further reinforcing this aquascape. So we're going to be using epoxy that we strategically position and put onto the aquascape so that it becomes a structure that holds up against the water flow and doesn't fall over, but creates, most importantly, a beautiful structure onto which the corals are going to grow. So let's show you the epoxy and how we use it to create our live rock aquascape. The epoxy that we're using today is the DD Aquascape epoxy. Now the reason why I like this epoxy is it's particularly easy to use and it sets very, very solid. Now I'll show you the way that I use the epoxy. First of all, it comes in 2 parts like so. Now I'm just going to open up these 2 packets, and you use the 2 different colors in equal amounts. Now, because I know I'm going to be using a lot of epoxy today, I'm going to cut this epoxy into 4 sections. Razor. Like so. So each of these has an equal part of the red and the grey. And now you knead it together. And so I basically just sort of start to mush it up, mix it as much as possible, and then start rolling it. Now you'll know you're finished when the color is homogeneous and you don't have any gray streaks through the epoxy. And this is one of the reasons why I do particularly like this brand of epoxy. It's very easy to work with. If you find that when you open up the box it's a little bit hard, you can put it in the microwave to soften it for a very short amount of time. But I do think this epoxy is one of the best in terms of how easy it is to use. It's a relatively slow setting epoxy, which does make it easier to use, but that also means that you may need to take longer to do your aquascape. And the reason why we've done this aquascape over what's going to be 4 or 5 visits is so that we can ensure that the previous lot of epoxy has fully set before we move on to the next stage. So now I've got my fully mixed epoxy. I'm actually going to cut this into 3, and I like to create short snakes like this. I find that most of the positions in the tank between the rocks that I want to use epoxy tends to favor this sort of shape. Sometimes I will roll it into little balls depending on exactly how I'm using it. So now we have our epoxy ready to go. It's important that you do use it quite quickly, so I'm going to jump straight in the tank and show you how I apply it to the live rock. So I'm going to apply this epoxy to this joint here, and you can see it's a joint between 2 rocks. So I'm going to start by putting our epoxy sort of in place just roughly, and then I'm going to push it into the seam as much as possible. Now, because this is a structure that still isn't 100% secure, I do have to be careful about how I apply pressure to the epoxy, and so I typically just do small sections, and I kind of, sort of just knead it into position. Now you can see there's a little bit of, I don't know, it looks like smoke almost coming off the epoxy. That's nothing to worry about. I don't find that there's any negative effects to using the epoxy. It doesn't seem to be toxic in any way. But that is a perfectly applied piece of epoxy, and you can see it's well and truly grabbing onto the rock either side. It's really pushed into the seam, and we'll leave that there to set, and it'll be set in a few hours. But that's basically how we use the epoxy on our live rock. The goal of this aquascape is to effectively create a structure that runs the length of the tank that's around about 2/3 the height of the tank. And the reason why we're doing that is because we do want to try and hide the room behind the aquarium by blocking it with fish and corals and rock structure. And so we're also trying to maximize the amount of caves that we create. So by propping up the rock, creating caves, we're going to have lots of little nooks and crannies and places for the fish to hide and to enjoy. And so the way we're doing that is we're getting pieces of rock that we can stand upright, and then we're laying pieces across, basically like a bridge, creating that swim through. Now we're at the stage now where we've probably used 90% of the rock, and so we're just finding pieces of rock to further continue that scape. Now I've got a piece here that I'm planning to use. I particularly like the look of this piece, and I want to put it relatively high. So the way that I find the position for it is I try it in a number of spots, and I'm looking for how well it sits, most importantly how it looks, and what sort of structures it will create. And so I do want to have a bit more, surface area on this part of the bommy. It's a little bit thin here, and so this rock right here will be perfect. And I have a look to see exactly where I'm going to put the epoxy. Now this is quite an obvious one. I'm going to put the epoxy right here, and that by itself will probably strengthen it. And I have another piece that I also want to incorporate into this section. So I look to see what the natural top side is. It's not particularly obvious with this one, but I love the shape, and I think it will perfectly fit in here. But I always like to just check that there's nowhere better. Choosing exactly where your pieces go is one of the most important aspects of using live rock. That's what I'd really like it to be. Yeah, okay, cool. So this way we've got more space from front to back of the aquarium, and so that's giving us heaps more coral spaces. It's also quite well balanced there. All right, so we have these two pieces that we're going to now epoxy in place. I couldn't possibly do a video about aquascaping with live rock without talking about the pros and cons of using live rock as opposed to dry and artificial rock. Now, first of all, the pros for live rock. And the biggest one is it very effectively creates a very natural biome with bacteria and algae that are really beneficial to create a stable ecosystem. Having a tank set up with live rock does make it very easy to navigate through the early ugly phases and potentially will be a more stable tank or aquarium in the future. Now, the cons of live rock are very well documented. People often worry about pests and algae and even diseases that can be introduced with the live rock. But the way that I look at it is that most of the things, the pests and diseases and algae that can be introduced with live rock can just as easily be introduced with corals. And if you're careful and considerate with your aquarium, most of these pests and algae are relatively easy to get rid of. Now, with this live rock behind me, the main hitchhiker that we've had are actually urchins. We've got a heap of small urchins, collector urchins, short spine urchins, which have come in with this live rock, and so they've really helped keep the algae under control. But we haven't had any problems with things like bryopsis or aptasia or any of the things that really scare people. Having said that, it is a possibility, and potentially having your live rock in a separate system so that you can have a look at it and quarantine it for a period might be a good idea. But I do find that most of the things that will be introduced with live rock are actually quite easy to deal with. Now, there is one exception, and that is mantis shrimp. And having a mantis shrimp in your tank can be a difficult proposition because they're very quick and hard to remove. But they're probably the one thing that I feel is a bit of a risk with adding live rock to your ecosystem. So there you go. That's how we use epoxy and live rock to create a beautiful natural reef structure. And in future episodes of Gallery Aquatica TV, we'll bring you back here and we'll show you other aspects of this aquarium. We'll show you the filtration, the lighting, we'll add corals and more fish. But that's today's video. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe. I'm Cam the Fish Guy. Happy reefing.